Vážené divačky, vážení diváci, dobrý podvečer, dovolte mi vás přivítat na přednášce doktorky Kayly Iacovino.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the lecture by Dr. Kayla Iacovino.
Kayla Iacovino je americká vulkanoložka a také experimentální petroložka, což znamená, že zkoumá horniny, která od roku 2005 působí na Arizona State University v Texasu, kde se původně chtěla stát astronautkou, ale poté se víceméně shodou okolností dostala ke geologii a už u ní zůstala.
Kayla is a volcanologist and also a researcher in experimental petrology, which means that she does research into minerals. And since 2005, she is attached to the Arizona State University in Texas. She originally wanted to be an astronaut, but incidentally she gravitated towards geology, and she stayed with it.
A v vulkanologii si později udělala i doktorát, a to na univerzitě v Cambridge, kde byl jejím školitelem sám známý vulkanolog Clive Oppenheimer, který je také hlavním protagonistou filmu Vítejte v pekle, který můžete vidět zítra v 5 hodin ve filmovém sále a kde Kayla přijde osobně tento film uvést.
Her PhD in volcanology was at Cambridge University with Dr. Clive Oppenheimer, who is also the protagonist of the film Into the Inferno. You can see that film at 5 o'clock tomorrow in the film hall, and Kayla will be introducing it, so this is an invitation for tomorrow.
Kayla díky vulkanologii procestovala prakticky celý svět a dokonce se stala první americkou vědkyní, které bylo umožněno zúčastnit se vědecké expedici v Severní Koreji, kde zkoumali vulkán Pektu, který leží na hranicích s Čínou a kde se údajně narodil sám Kim Il-sen.
Thanks to volcanology, Kayla traveled the globe, and in fact she took part in the first research in North Korea. She was the first US researcher in North Korea, where they were conducting research into the volcano Pektu, which lies on the very border with China, and apparently Kim Il-sen was born around there.
A pokud zrovna necestuje po světě, tak si doma v Arizoně v laboratoři vyrábí takové mini magmatické komory, kde zkoumá vlastně horniny a experimentuje vlastně s vysokým tlakem a s vysokými teplotami a co se vlastně děje v těch samotných sopkách s horninami.
And when Kayla is not traveling around the globe in her laboratory in Arizona, she is building kind of pocket-sized magmatic chambers where she experimentally researches what happens to minerals under high pressure and high temperatures. Actually, what is happening inside the volcano?
Dnešní přednáška ale nebude o vulkánech, ta bude až zítra. Dnešní přednáška bude spíše o vulkáncích a obecně o Star Treku, protože Kayla je Trekkie, velký fanoušek Star Treku, dokonce říká, že jí Star Trek inspiroval k tomu, aby se dala na vědeckou dráhu a ještě předtím, než se sama chtěla stát astronautkou, tak rok studovala na filmové škole a chtěla asi natočit sama nějaké pokračování Star Treku, ale protože jí chyběla, postrádala vědu, tak se tedy nakonec dala na geologii.
But lecture tonight is not about volcanoes, but about volcans, about the Star Trek, because Kayla is a big Trekkie, and in fact before devoting herself to geology, she studied cinema for a while, and in fact she wanted to make a sequel to Star Trek, but the science behind it was missing, so that's how Kayla came to science.
A v současnosti je šéfredaktorkou webu trekmovie.com, kde už 11 let píše články o Star Treku a také často vystupuje v médiích nebo na konferencích Star Trekovských, kde se věnuje různým Star Trekovským tématům.
Kayla is also an editor-in-chief of the website trekmovie.com. For 11 years she has been writing for this website and leading it, and also publishing articles and speaking publicly about issues around Star Trek.
A poslední věc, kterou bych rád zmínil, je ta, že Kayla o sobě sama prohlašuje, že je feministkou, ráda podporuje ženy k tomu, aby nastoupily vědeckou kariéru, takže můžeme říct, že na letošním AFU propojuje v podstatě 3 témata, protože vlastně ženy ve vědě je téma, které je pravidelnou součástí našeho programu.
Kayla is also a professed feminist, and she likes to inspire women to become involved in science. And women in science has always been one of the focuses of Academia Film Olomouc, so it very nicely ties up several of the themes of Academia Film Olomouc.
Přejeme vám příjemný zážitek. Doktorka Kayla Iacovino.
Kayla Iacovino, enjoy the lecture.
Hear me? Great. Thanks very much, Yuri, and thanks to my translators as well. It's amazing to be here with you guys today. I was thrilled to get the invitation to come speak with you all. I'm really excited about AFO and everything that's going on at the festival, and very pleased to be talking to you today about something that's very near and dear to my heart. A few topics, actually. One of them being Star Trek, the other being how Star Trek inspires people, and mainly how Star Trek inspires scientists and has inspired myself as well to go into scientific fields. So let's dive right in. So this is a picture that probably most of you recognize, probably all of you recognize. This is Captain Kirk and the original crew of the first Starship Enterprise from Star Trek the original series. And I think it's worth noting that I'm able to come here to the Czech Republic and show you a picture from a science fiction series made in 1966 in California that was canceled twice, and you all recognize this instantly. You know, Star Trek has had a lasting legacy, and that's also proven by the number of other series of Star Trek. This is, of course, Star Trek The Next Generation, Captain Picard, in the late 80s and early 90s. Then we went on to Star Trek Deep Space Nine in the mid-90s, Star Trek Voyager in the late 90s, Star Trek Enterprise in the early 2000s, and of course today's show, Star Trek Discovery, which you should all be able to watch on Netflix in the Czech Republic. This might actually be one of the first times, if not the first time, that Star Trek I think it's the first time that Star Trek is being broadcast at the same time across the world. So the same day that it airs in the United States and Canada and Britain and Czech Republic and South Africa, everywhere you can see Star Trek now thanks to services like Netflix. And so I think it's amazing I wanted to start my talk by mentioning this legacy of Star Trek. And I think what I'm going to talk to you about today, which is how Star Trek has inspired scientists, is the same reason that Star Trek has lasted so long. And there's maybe one other science fiction show that can have such a long legacy like Star Trek. That would be maybe Doctor Who, and maybe a couple of others. But of course, Star Trek also had 13 films, and 2 more possibly in the making right now. So hopefully that's convinced you that Star Trek has been going on for a long time, and there's a lot of it out there. But what is Star Trek about? To me, Star Trek is a show about explorers, and it's a show about not necessarily even exploring space. It's a show about exploring the human condition. And what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a human on Earth, and what is our place in the universe? And I thought about this a bit, and I thought, you know, what's inspired me from Star Trek is this idea of exploration, exploring ourselves, exploring our planet, exploring our universe. And I thought our drive to explore, I tried to quantify that. Our drive to explore, I think, is to seek knowledge and gain experience and understanding. And this is knowledge concerning the universe, you know, what is it made up of, how does it work, but also knowledge of other people, other cultures. And through exploration, we can learn about other people, we can learn to understand them, and we can have common shared experiences. So, what I'm going to be doing today in this talk is stepping you through a number of examples of how Star Trek has inspired scientists, and how Star Trek has inspired technologies, and just continues to inspire the world that we live in. And I'm going to go through a few different examples and tell you a series of different stories. And the first story is about this woman here. You probably recognize her as Uhura from Star Trek, the original series. And the actress's name is Nichelle Nichols. And she played a very important role in some of the earliest inspirational stories of Star Trek. You know, I mean, right away you'll notice that she's black and she's a woman, and this was, remember, in 1966. So she's a black woman in a position of power on the bridge of a starship. So that was something that was really special at that time, and actually had a really big effect. And so what I'm going to show you is a clip from this film. It's called Trek Nation, and it's a film by the son of the creator of Star Trek, the son of Gene Roddenberry, and he goes back and looks into his father's past and tries to learn about some of these inspirational stories. And so the first one I'm going to show you is this clip of Nichelle, and it's her story of how meeting a Star Trek fan changed her life and the lives of a lot of other people.
Uhura, you're the only one who can do it.
I was pleased that in those days, when you couldn't get even blacks on television, that I not only had a black, but a black woman and a black officer.
You are away from your post, mister.
And that'll show them.
I told Gene after the end of the first season that I would not be returning to the show.
We terrified and overwrought.
That I wanted to return to my first love, which is musical theater. But I didn't know that meeting a Star Trek fan would change my life. I was told that fan wanted to meet me, and I turned and looked into the face of Dr. Martin Luther King. I was breathless. He says, yes, I'm the Trekker. I'm a Star Trek fan. And he told me that Star Trek was one of the only shows that his wife, Coretta, and he would allow their little children to stay up and watch. And thanked him, and I told him that I was leaving the show. All the smile came off his face, and he said, you can't do that. He said, don't you understand that for the first time, we are seen as we should be seen? You don't have a black role. You have an equal role. And when I went back to work on Monday morning, I went to Gene's office and I told him what had happened over the weekend. And he says, welcome home. We got a lot of work to do.
So that's Nichelle's story. It's a really inspiring story, and it ended up leading to a lot more than that. So after she learned that Martin Luther King was so inspired by what she was doing on screen, and it made her realize the importance of her role there, she ended up, after Star Trek, wanting to keep promoting that, to keep promoting black women in roles like this, equal roles, and also in science. And after Star Trek, she was approached by NASA. This is a picture of her during the time that she was officially a NASA ambassador. And in the earlier days of NASA, they came to her and they said, Nichelle, we have a problem. We want to recruit women, and we want to recruit black people and people of color, and just no matter what we do, they don't seem to apply to the astronaut program. We don't know, we think they want to be astronauts, we think they want to be in science, but none of them are coming to our program. And she looked at them and she said, she looked at this room and said, well, have you ever stopped to think that maybe it's because you're all white men, and the people that you want to apply to work with you, you don't look like them. You know, people want to see someone that looks like them. in a role that they're going to want to pursue. And so they said, okay, great, you're hired. Please tell us how to get more people interested in science and interested in NASA. And so she did, and she joined NASA as an ambassador, recruiting people. And she ended up working with a woman named Mae Jemison, who was inspired by watching Uhura on screen as a child to go into a scientific role. And Mae Jemison eventually became, through the efforts of Nichelle Nichols and the Astronaut Ambassador Program, became the first black woman in space, first black American woman in space. And after she finished her tour with NASA, she went on to have a cameo role on Star Trek The Next Generation. And this is Mae Jemison and Uhura, Nichelle Nichols, on the set of Star Trek The Next Generation. So I really like this example because it's a tangible way that Star Trek has inspired someone who's an icon of science, an astronaut. And there are plenty of other people who have been inspired by Nichelle Nichols as well. This may be my favorite picture on the internet. I can't look at this picture and not smile. This is the former US President Barack Obama, who is second as a president, maybe, and first as a Trekkie, I like to think. And this is him with Nichelle Nichols in the White House. So he's another person who's been inspired by Star Trek. And of course, the current show, Star Trek Discovery, the lead actress in that show is a black woman by the name of Sonequa Martin Green. She plays the character Michael Burnham. This is an image of her and Nichelle Nichols at a press junket. So they've been working together as well on this show, and Sonequa has been able to work with her to see what more she can do with her new role in Star Trek. So that was a sort of a humanitarian example, and I wanted to talk a bit as well about the technological side of things, because there's a lot of what I think are kind of obvious spin-offs of technology that we use today that are inspired by Star Trek, and a lot of them actually, they don't just look like they're from Star Trek. They actually were, the inventors say, inspired directly by watching Star Trek. And these are the two stories I'm going to tell you about this. The first one is the cell phone, which probably everyone here 15 years ago had a flip phone like that in their pocket, and that was directly inspired by the communicator. And I'm also going to tell you about digital assistants and how those were inspired. And this is a Google project that was inspired by Star Trek. So the cell phone is a cool story because this guy, Martin Cooper, who was working for Motorola at the time, was coming up with a way to find a new product that could compete on the market. And he's said many, many times that the way he came up with an idea for a mobile cellular phone was when he was watching an episode of Star Trek, the original series, and Captain Kirk got his communicator out and sent a message back to his starship. And Martin thought, we can do this today. And he's the guy who put cell phones in everyone's hands, which obviously led to today's smartphones. And this one's a cool project because it was also one of the examples where it's been explicitly stated that Star Trek was the inspiration for the product. And this is a project that was originally called Project Majel, and it was a Google project to come up with a way for people to talk to Google search. So if you wanted to go to google.com, instead of typing in your search query, you could just ask Google, hey Google, what's the weather today, right? And this was one of the earliest iterations of what became today's Google Assistant, which is a thing that now you can pick up your Android phone or go to your Google Home and say, hey Google, what's the weather today? And it will tell you. And that was based on Star Trek's computer, where people could walk into a room and say, computer, calculate the trajectory of a photon torpedo, blah, 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 and ask it all kinds of questions, and she would just come up with responses. And I put a picture of this woman on the screen. Some of you maybe don't recognize her. She was in actually 3 Star Trek series, and it's a woman named Majel Barrett, later named Majel Barrett Roddenberry, when she married the creator of Star Trek. And this is her on the top here, is her as Nurse Chapel in Star Trek, the original series. And here is her as Lwaxana Troi, who is Deanna Troi's mother in Star Trek, The Next Generation. And if you've never seen her in Star Trek, but you've watched Star Trek, you may still recognize her voice.
Warning, life support failure on all decks. Abandoned ship.
So that was Majel Barrett's voice. And she was the voice of the computer in all of the Star Trek series. And so it was this idea that spawned Google Assistant. And I thought it would be clever to show a little video of my phone doing something. So I asked it, what's the weather in Prague today?
In Prague today, it'll be mostly sunny, with a forecasted high of 76 and a low of 48. Currently it's 60 and clear.
And then I realized that this would be confusing maybe for a couple of reasons. So I asked it, what's the weather in Olomouc, Czech Republic, in Celsius?
Right now in Olomouc, it's 12 degrees Celsius and clear. Today, it'll be sunny, with a forecasted high of 26 and a low of 11.
That's old, so that's not the forecast for today, so sorry about that. But yeah, so this was a technology that we all use. Probably I use this every day, and it was inspired by, this woman in her role as the computer in Star Trek. And those are a couple of, I think, maybe kind of obvious examples, right, of technology. Maybe some of you even know those stories already. So I wanted to talk about a couple less well-known examples of technology spin-offs from Star Trek. And the first is from my second favorite Star Trek movie, Star Trek IV, Voyage Home, the one about the whales. And it's a technology called transparent aluminum. And this was, there's an image from the film, from Star Trek IV, which it was a thing that did not exist at the time that this movie came out in 1986. And on the right, this is just a picture of modern-day transparent aluminum, which is based on, not necessarily this molecular formula, but it's based on this idea, which came first in Star Trek. And so I'm going to show you another video talking a bit about that story.
Transparent aluminum was once pure science fiction, a technical term used in a Star Trek movie from the 80s. In the movie Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, Captain Kirk and his team go back in time to acquire 2 whales from the past and transport them back to the future. Scotty needed some materials to make a holding tank for whales on the ship, but had no money to pay for the materials. So Scotty uses his knowledge of 23rd century technology and the manufacturer's computer, and he programs in how to make the transparent aluminum molecule.
Transparent aluminum?
Which could allow the manufacturer to create aquarium tank walls 1 inch thick instead of the traditional 6 inches thick. Now the words transparent aluminum sounds like it's 100% pure see-through metal, but in actual fact it's a mix of aluminum, oxygen and nitrogen in the form of white powder. The powder then gets packed into a mould in the shape of the desired part. The mould is then subjected to extreme pressure and then heated to 2000 degrees for several days. The surface of the final part comes out cloudy and has to be mechanically polished to make it optically clear. It starts to sound less impressive and less sciencey fiction when you hear how it's made, but the end result is still very impressive. As transparent aluminum, which is also known as Alon, can be turned into very damage-resistant glass and can be used to make highly bullet-resistant armour for military vehicles. Transparent aluminum armour is made of 3 layers, just like bullet-resistant glass, 2 panes of glass and a middle pane of polycarbonate. The main difference is a .50 caliber bullet can penetrate 6 inches of traditional bullet-resistant glass, but cannot get through about 1.5 inches of Alon armour. Which means you can provide soldiers with far better protection on military vehicles for far less weight. Alon is being considered as a replacement for windows on the International Space Station, to replace the traditional laminated glass they use now. as the laminate scratches easily, which ruins the clarity of the viewports in Windows. But Alon does not need to be laminated, and it does not chip easily like glass. Transparent aluminum armour is light years ahead of glass, but it is currently very expensive to make. The bullet-resistant glass currently in use costs around $3 per square inch to produce, compared to the $10 to $15 price tag for the same size piece of transparent aluminum. As more industries switch to transparent aluminum for their needs, the price of the product could drop to a point that makes it cheaper to use in other applications. Providing windows for deep space and undersea vehicles are among the top planned uses. But hopefully in time, it will filter down to the average consumer in the form of camera lenses, eyeglasses, or the more importantly, mobile phone screens. Gone will be the days of scratches and cracks. But I guess we'll need to wait a little longer for those days. Anyway, that's the end of this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.
So, the story of transparent aluminum, and I think I was really excited to tell that story because I really love the movie that it comes from, Star Trek IV, and it gives me the opportunity to show something that I recently learned that I think is just completely amazing and weird, and I wanted to share it with you guys. This is another thing that was inspired by Star Trek IV. And it's just a little piece of Star Trek trivia for you. In Star Trek IV, as the guy explained in that video, they go back in time to find whales, to bring them to the future. It sounds ridiculous, but it's a fantastic movie. And so there's this whole theme with whales. And that was released in 1986. The following year, Star Trek The Next Generation aired on television. And so they were making this film at the time, this television series at the time. And the original designs for the Enterprise D, the ship in Star Trek The Next Generation, included something called cetacean ops. Cetacean is the word for whales and dolphins. And the idea is that dolphins and whales are natural-born navigators and could help steer the Enterprise. And so this is a blueprint of the ship, and you can see cetacean ops is labeled here. There's a little whale lab. There's some whales having a discussion over here, and there's just a zoom in of that image on the right. This did not end up happening ever. They never used this in The Next Generation, but apparently you can hear it in the background of some episode of The Next Generation. You know, someone talking on the radio or something. They say something about cetacean ops. So just a fun piece of trivia that I thought I had to share with you guys. Now the next technology is sort of, we're getting farther into the technology that doesn't exist yet. So stuff that's still almost in the science fiction realm, but is going to be true and is going to be here, maybe, hopefully in the near future. And that's the Qualcomm Tricorder X-Prize. The tricorder, for the non-Trekkies in the audience, is of course the science tool, the analytical tool used by Spock, and used by Mr. Data, and used by plenty of characters to analyze pretty much anything. You know, the crew will beam down to a planet, and Mr. Spock will get his tricorder out, and he'll say, "Oh, I'm detecting life signs, Captain." Or detecting plant life, or whatever it is. They can see pretty much anything on those devices. And it's also used by all the doctors in Star Trek. If there's something wrong with you, the doctor waves his wand over you and reads off of his tricorder what's ailing you and fixes it, and you're on your way. And the X-Prize, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is a money prize for a specific product or project. And in the Qualcomm X-Prize, they wanted groups of scientists and engineers and designers to get together and create a modern-day tricorder, and they defined that as a device that could be used for medicine, for medical purposes, to scan humans in a non-invasive way and see if they have any problems that can be addressed just using a handheld device. And so there's another video that I'm going to show you about the X-Prize and how that was inspired by Star Trek II.
4 billion people today on Earth don't have access to basic health care. There's a tremendous need and shortage of physicians everywhere.
In the developing world, there's just not enough healthcare workers, or the distances are too great and the population's too dispersed.
We're still using tools that really haven't changed in decades, but now in our age of digital and mobile health, what if we could connect those together and put those in the hands of each of us, the consumer, the patient?
A lot of chronic conditions can be managed on a continuous basis if we deploy the technology.
But what we weren't seeing was a catalyst that brought everybody together to build the whole system and to make it easy for a consumer or a lightly skilled healthcare professional to use.
When you have a prize that's sort of audacious but achievable, the competition element speeds up the whole process, creates a fire.
The Qualcomm Tricorder X-Prize. Our goal is really to bring the tricorder technology of Star Trek to life.
The doctor just waved the box over you and you knew what was going on.
Star Trek is a positive vision of the future where technology empowers man.
So the team has to be able to develop a tricorder device that is less than 5 pounds. It's able to diagnose up to 13 medical conditions, take 5 vital signs continuously, and they have a very positive user experience.
Now we're really taking the technology out of the sole possession of physicians and putting them into the hands of the community.
Tricorder will connect hospital care to home care.
We are putting your health back in your own hands.
If you're an EMT or if you're a healthcare professional or a mom, what you lack to make better decisions is data.
Most medical devices that exist today are developed for healthcare professionals, and they diagnose a specific condition, and that's it. So this is a first-to-the-world application of these devices.
This device monitors respiratory rate, blood oxygen levels,
ECG, respiration, temperature,
sleep apnea, atrial fibrillation,
anemia or Hep A,
blood pressure.
This prize is extremely challenging.
It's been a struggle. Everybody is working on their real full-time jobs, and this is still just a part-time endeavor.
We're a very small company, but yet we're a very enthusiastic team.
We've got MDs, we've got data scientists, we've got biochemists, we've got program managers.
We are a full stack company. We're a machine here. You know, we are a machine building machines.
Teams have contributed thousands of hours of R&D and millions of dollars of funding to support their prototype development.
This is the last couple years of iterations of different designs.
We're building something that no one's ever built before.
This is our first prototype, testing software algorithms in the hospital.
The system consists of 5 subsystems.
This is our blood test system, and I will show you the blood test here.
This is a vitality necklace. This is the foundation of our platform.
These devices have to be embraced by the consumer, so we actually recruit patients as consumer testers who have one of the 13 conditions these devices are intended to diagnose.
That required a rather substantial team that included nurses, coordinators, and a variety of other clinical experts.
You can do all the simulations in the world, but having an active user throws in variables that you can never account for. And they see the result right there as they're using it, and they're like, that's awesome, where can I get one?
People will say this is where mobile healthcare started.
This project could have an impact on society as a whole.
This is going to be a wake-up call for the world.
I'm strongly motivated to see this happen. I think together we can solve this problem much easier and much faster.
These are people who are committed to global scale impact.
You feel a connection between the world that Star Trek promotes and the people that see a technology that's only suggested in Star Trek and then make it real and then make it better. If this tricorder device can save lives, what a blessing for all of us.
Live long and prosper.
So that is the Tricorder X-Prize. And I think that's another cool story. And again, that's one of these technologies that's up and coming that maybe we can see in the near future. And so I wanted to bring it back now after talking about some of these technologies, to give you a few more examples of real-life people and real-life scientists and engineers who were inspired by Star Trek. And so to do that, I decided to send a tweet. And this was a week or so ago before I came here, and I said, hey Twitterverse, are you a scientist who's inspired by Star Trek? I'm giving a talk on how Star Trek inspired a generation of scientists, and I wanted to include your photo and something about what you do. Please retweet and live long and prosper. And I got a lot of responses. And I have an okay Twitter following, but even at this point, I already had 79 retweets and 109 likes. That's pretty good, I think. But I got some great responses from people, and I just wanted to share some of them with you. And these are just people who responded to my tweets. It's a very small view of this huge array of people who credit their life's passion with something inspired by a 1960s science fiction show. So here's one woman by the name of Rachel who says, yes, Janeway, captain from the Voyager, is my life role model. # women in STEM. Great, thanks Rachel. Rachel is a radiotherapy physicist. Then we have Dr. David Williams, who I actually work with at Arizona State University. He says, I was inspired to get into planetary science through watching the original series 5 nights a week throughout the 1970s, with the animated series on Saturday mornings. Dr. Dave, LLAP. And that reminds me, too, that I actually forgot to include that one more series I didn't mention, which is the cartoon show, the animated series of Star Trek, which is on in the 70s. So thanks, Dave. And then there's Veronica Olson, an accelerator physicist, who says, like so many other scientists, I've been inspired by Star Trek and other science fiction shows. We've got a good interdisciplinary collaboration going on there. And then there's Graham, an astrobiologist, who had tweeted earlier, it's national, I found this on his Twitter, it's National Science Fiction Day today. So many of us in the sciences have been inspired in our lives by the imaginings of science fiction creators. I think Star Trek The Next Generation was the most inspiring for me when I was in my youth. What sci-fi impacted you the most? And we have Tanya Harrison, who's another person that I've worked with at Arizona State, who says, as a kid, I wanted to be Geordi, who's, of course, the engineer from Star Trek The Next Generation, the guy with the visor. I thought being able to fix a spaceship would be the coolest job in the universe. And now she works on spaceships on Mars. And there were too many to do this for everyone who responded. But I wanted to throw up some more pictures of people that responded to me to sort of drive home the point that there's a lot of them. And these are, like I said, these are just a handful of people that responded to me from this one tweet. And they were excited to say, yes, I was inspired by Star Trek, and this is what stuff I'm studying now, and I think it's really cool, and I hope other people think it's really cool. And the way that I wanted to end this talk was to bring it back to the human side of things. I was obviously inspired by Star Trek. And people often make the joke, were you inspired to study volcanoes because of Vulcans? The answer is no, but that's okay. Vulcans are great. I wouldn't even say, I thought about this a lot, right? I've talked about Star Trek in public before, and people ask me a lot, what about Star Trek inspired me? And the realization that I've come to is that it wasn't the science in Star Trek. It wasn't the setting. At the beginning of this talk, I said Star Trek is a show about explorers, not exploration, but about explorers, people who explore. And it's a show about the human condition, what does it mean to be human? And it's set in space, but it's not a show about space. It's set in the future, but it's not a show about future. It's not a show about technology. It's not a show about aliens. It's a show about people and their passions and what drives them and what they think makes them a better person and what they think can make the universe a better place to live in. And that's what inspired me. It's this passion for exploration, for creativity, for understanding, for getting to know other cultures, and just trying to live your best life and make the universe a better place. And that's what drove me, is that's what scientists have. And that's what drives scientists, even those who aren't inspired by Star Trek. It's curiosity, right, about the universe. How does it work? What is it made up of? Who are the people that live in it? And I'm not a filmmaker, but as Yuri said, I did do about a semester in film school before I left. And I like to think that a lot of filmmakers are also driven by the same things, to explore what it means to be human, and to explore what it means to connect people. So science is a tool that we use to explore the universe, to try to explain the universe. And for a lot of people, I think film, whether it be making science fiction shows like Star Trek, or documentaries, or comedies, or dramas, or action movies, is a tool that filmmakers can use to understand the world around them and to connect with people who are watching their show, and connect with them on an emotional level and an intellectual level. So I think the same thing that drives artists and scientists and the people of Star Trek and the same thing that drives the fans of Star Trek to be in love with a show that's over 50 years old. It's the same thing. It's the drive for knowledge, passion, understanding, and curiosity. And so I wanted to finish this talk with one final video, which is my favorite scene in all of Star Trek. And that's saying something. There's a lot of Star Trek. This is the very last scene from Star Trek The Next Generation. It's okay, there's no real spoilers if you haven't seen it. But it's a fantastic scene, and to me, it embodies what Star Trek is about and what it means to be a part of this universe. So, I'll show you this video.
The Continuum didn't think you had it in you, Jean-Luc. But I knew you did.
You're saying that it worked? We collapsed the anomaly.
Is that all this meant to you? Just another spatial anomaly, just another day at the office?
Did it work?
Well, you're here, aren't you? You're talking to me, aren't you?
What about my crew?
The anomaly, my ship, my crew. I suppose you're worried about your fish, too. If it puts your mind at ease, you've saved humanity once again.
Thank you.
For what?
You had a hand in helping me get out of this.
I was the one that got you into it. A directive from the Continuum. The part about the helping hand, though, was my idea.
I sincerely hope that this is the last time that I find myself here.
You just don't get it, do you, Jean-Luc? The trial never ends. We wanted to see if you had the ability to expand your mind and your horizons. And for one brief moment, you did.
When I realized the paradox.
Exactly. For that one fraction of a second, you were open to options you had never considered. That is the exploration that awaits you. Not mapping stars and studying nebula, but charting the unknown possibilities of existence.
Q, what is it that you're trying to tell me?
You'll find out. In any case, I'll be watching. And if you're very lucky, I'll drop by to say hello from time to time. See you out there.
That's music swell then leads into another scene. But this is the second to last scene of the series, and like I said, it sort of embodies for me everything that the way that Star Trek inspires people, mapping the unknown possibilities of human existence. So with that, I'll say thank you to Kui, and I'll take any questions.
Máte možnost se tedy Kayly na něco zeptat, pokud vás něco zajímá, a nemusíte se ptát v angličtině, je možno se ptát i v češtině a bude to přeloženo.
A prosím, ptejte se na mikrofon. Please ask your questions on the microphone so they can be translated either from English to Czech, anebo naopak.
We have one up there, I think, back. It's coming with the microphone.
I would like to ask, who is your favorite character from Star Trek? How did they inspire you, and what's your favorite invention?
Oh, good question. Should I wait for the translation? Or?
Yeah.
It's like, okay. So my favorite character, I think, has changed a lot over the years. As a kid, I think it was probably Commander Data from the Next Generation. I like to tell people I'm a Next Generation baby. I grew up watching that show. It was on the air, as when I was born and in my childhood. And he was sort of like Mr. Spock in the original series. He was the weird one. He was an android. He was different from everyone. But he was a scientist, and he took everything very seriously. And people respected him, and he did his job. I think today, though, looking back, probably Dr. Crusher would be my favorite character. Because what I didn't realize at the time, when I was a kid, is that Dr. Crusher, who's the chief medical officer, the head doctor on the Enterprise Next Generation, people actually complain about her character a lot today. They say she's not feminist enough, she was too motherly and caring, she had her son on the ship with her, and she wasn't badass enough, I guess. But I thought she was totally badass. I thought she was a smart scientist, she was a doctor, she was the head doctor of the Enterprise, and she was also a mother. And she was also feminine. And you can be both of those things, right? It's not one or the other. And that, I think, was really inspiring to me, to think, I was a tomboy growing up, but, I didn't have to be. I didn't have to be in a box, and so I think that was why I loved her. And your other question was my favorite, invention from the show, or technology? Okay, so a technology that I would like to see in Star Trek, I'd like to see that made into a real thing. Probably have to say the transporter, even though it scares the heck out of me. I think I might, maybe that's not even true, because I think I might be a little bit like Dr. McCoy in that I wouldn't want to go near the things, because they're kind of terrifying. But I travel so much, and how cool would it be to, have lunch in Paris and then, go for a swim in New Zealand and whatever, and, in a single day. I think if it wasn't the transporter, though, if I was too terrified to use it, I'd probably have to say the replicator, which is the device that can create anything for you. And we sort of have that with 3D printers today. But the idea that you could take, molecules from the air or wherever and make anything you want, food, clothes, books. And that's what, in Star Trek, they like to say that was one of the technologies that helped them end world hunger and all these things. And I think it would be something that would be really great for the world, to deliver things like food and water to countries, people that don't have it. So that'd probably be those are my top two choices. Yeah, one over here. Here.
Hi, I am Jaroslav. I am one of scientists inspired by Star Trek as well.
Awesome.
I was not able, because of my psychological bipolar disorder, to study university. I tried several times, but I failed. But I am a programmer, and I am working on my own tricorder, detecting gases and such things, just for you do volcanoes and such things. Yeah, so it's very close to me. I want to ask you, what do you think about Star Trek Discovery. If you like the way it's going forward now, I like it very much, I might personally say. And thank you very much for your speech.
Thank you very much for your question. We should chat after, because I'd love to hear more about what you're doing. That sounds amazing. So the question of, what do I think of Discovery is when you get a Star Trek fan and you ask them what do they like this or that about Star Trek, we could be here for a while if you want my real answer. No, I like it. I think it's great. It's really exciting, and I think what they're trying to do is very difficult. They're trying to take Star Trek, and for those of you who don't watch Discovery, it's set before the original series in the Star Trek universe, and they're trying to take this and take it to make it a modern show. One with like huge budgets, and it's a online streaming original, and it's like got the trappings of a 2018 show, and they're trying to recreate something that looks like it's taking place around the time of the original series, which was of course made in 1966 with the bright colors and the big buttons and everything. I mean, it looks goofy. The original series looks goofy, but it's part of why we love it. So I think what they're trying to do is really hard, and I think in a lot of ways they're succeeding in that. I think one of my favorite things about it is how much the creators of the show care about diversity. They have a black woman as the lead of the show. They have a lot of people of color on the show. They have the first gay characters in Star Trek television are on Star Trek Discovery. And I love that it's available to the whole world. Like, this is the first time it's so easy to access Star Trek. So I think that's really cool. So yeah, I really, really like it, and I dig it. And season 2 is coming out later this year. Can't wait. So yeah. If you want to learn more, check out trekmovie.com. We have all the news.
Kayla, thank you so much for the great presentation. And I guess a follow-on to what you were just saying is, well, okay, the series will continue in the form of being online and presumably future movies as well, but how can we keep, let's say, bringing the inspiring message and keep teaching those values that Star Trek has brought us? What can we do to help continue that for future generations?
I think that's a great question. I think one of the ways that they're trying to do that on Discovery is through this diversity idea, and I think it's hard to have a vision for that right now, making it now. I mean, looking back at the original series today, we can say, oh wow, they had a black woman on the bridge, they had a Russian, they had a Scottish guy, and we can look back and see these are obvious things, right, that they could do. But I wasn't alive in the 60s, but I imagine that they weren't actually that obvious at the time, that those are the things that needed to be done. And so I think it's a hard task for the creators to figure out what those key issues are. But I know that they care, and they're trying, and that I think matters a lot. So I think showing diversity, it's like Nichelle taught us with her work with NASA, showing people who look like you in different positions can inspire you. And I think just like normalizing those things. So I always like to talk about how when I was a kid growing up, I didn't notice that there were all these women in space or whatever it was. I just saw them as people. And so when growing up, being interested in science, I never thought, oh, it might be hard for me because I'm a woman, I'm going to have more struggles or anything. That thought never crossed my mind. And so because it was such a normal thing, it's like, yeah, I'll go into science because that's cool and that's what I want to do. And it's not until my adulthood that I look back and realized that maybe there were times where I did have a more difficult path. I think the fact that I didn't even know about it is what made that work for me. So, yeah, like I said, I think the diversity thing is huge for me, and just taking the core message of Trek, which is acceptance. There's the Vulcan saying, infinite diversity and infinite combinations. The idea that the more diverse we are, the more strong we are, and you don't have to agree with the other side, but you can try and understand them. Those kinds of ideas. I think, the world we live in today could probably use a lot more understanding, especially from different cultures. So I think, yeah, just showing that message more and more, I think, and just normalizing that and saying, this is what our world in Star Trek looks like. You know, if it's like Star Trek saying to the world, if you guys want to do this, cool, this is the way that we're doing it, and we think it works pretty great.
Okay, so is Star Trek an exception, or are there other TV series or movies which you would say are quite inspirational for scientists or for young people to become scientists?
Yeah, definitely. I think I mentioned Doctor Who, although that's sort of fantasy. There's, you know, Star Wars, obviously. There's Stargate is a big one. I think each of those has their own flavor. There's a great show on right now called The Expanse. It's on Netflix, I think. And there's a ton of science fiction stories. I think there's books. There's obviously tons of books. You know, classic stories like Isaac Asimov. And there's Karel Čapek from the Czech Republic, who's a huge influential figure in science fiction. Yeah, and I think it's all, you know, and it doesn't matter, I think, what someone chooses to be their inspiration. It's whatever they come across in their life. You know, if it's a cartoon or, you know, a Mission Impossible, great, you know. I think what's unique about Star Trek, though, and I really do think it's unique, and I think that the evidence for me is how long the legacy has lasted, is that it's, like I said, it's really a show about the people. And things like Star Wars, I love Star Wars, great, you know, great movies. Like Star Wars is a fantasy show set in space, you know, so it's not really even science fiction as much as like a hard sci-fi like Star Trek or Stargate. But all of these things have the same thing in common, which is they're shows about people. And so I think, you know, the science part of it, like I said, for me is that connection to exploration. So it doesn't matter if you have space or technology or spaceships around you. I think it's just, you know, and the other thing too is I think we want to inspire people to go into science, but another just as important goal, I think, is to inspire people to understand what scientists do. So, you know, if I'm a scientist and I want my friend who's not a scientist to maybe vote for someone who cares about climate change, they need to understand why they should care. And if we can teach them to think scientifically, then that's what matters, right? So, yeah. Uh-oh, talked about Star Wars.
Hi. I just wanted to say, there's a program called CSI, Crime Scene Investigation, and it inspired loads of children to go into university to study forensic science. They called it the CSI effect. So I was wondering to what extent you think programs like Star Trek could be used in schools to help the next generation literally take on more subjects.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, I love CSI. It's a great show. I didn't realize they had this name, the CSI effect. That's really cool. I think Star Trek is, I think it's useful in schools as sort of a way to teach kids about sort of why they should care about things, put things into a bigger context, and kids, I think, but university students as well. And I know there are a number of professors who've written books like The Science of Star Trek and use those kind of examples in their classes. And I think it's powerful to use an example that you can connect with someone. So, and I don't care what it is. It could be Star Trek, and I think it's really useful because so many people know it, and it gives them a frame of reference. But when I'm working, say, one-on-one with someone, like in a laboratory setting, and I'm trying to teach them about something, it's easy for me to talk about it, like start in the context of Star Trek. But if they're a baseball fan, I'll try to use baseball analogies. I don't know anything about baseball, but I can try. Or I'll try to. I'm a volcanologist, and one of my favorite times I was teaching someone was they were really into beer. And there's actually a lot in common between the way volcanoes erupt and the way beers, foam if you open a beer and it goes everywhere. And so we were talking about how magmas, lavas moving up to the surface, they get bubbles in them and then they explode. It's literally the same process as a beer that explodes. And so it's like using these kinds of examples. And as soon as I used the beer thing, she was like, oh, okay, now I get it. So I think Star Trek can do the same thing.
Well, Kayla, how do you feel as a woman the basic difference between authority of Captain Man, just as Captain Picard, and Captain Woman, just as Captain Janeway?
Yeah, good question. God, I don't want to think about that. I want to think about my answer. I think they're both inspiring. It's usually inspiring to me. And again, I think it comes from a place of watching it as a kid and not even realizing what gender they were necessarily when I was really young. But one thing I like about Captain Janeway that's sort of similar to Beverly Crusher, I think, is her ability to be, to be a woman, to be caring. And she was a pretty, she was probably on the badass scale. She was like more onto the badass side, right? Compared with the motherly side, I would say, than Beverly. But she was tough and she was stern, and but she wasn't seen as like, ooh, that woman who's being too hard, and people respected her. So I think, it's partly the way that Janeway approached problems and the way that she led her crew, but also the way that her crew reacted to her was really powerful, I think, for me to see that you can be an authoritative woman and that's okay. And Picard, we could talk about gender roles for days probably, but Picard had a lot of feminine qualities too. I think he was a very caring person, and he's the kind of guy who would look out for you. If you're one of his crew, just like Janeway as well. It's like he would be the father figure, or she would be the mother figure, whatever you want to say. So I think they have a lot of similarities, and the fact that they were portrayed as, doesn't make it doesn't make a difference what gender they were in the Star Trek universe. I think that's what translates for me. So, but I probably have to trying to think if I can say my favorite captain is Picard. I think it is because I grew up with him. So. Hi.
Thank you for your speech. I just wanted to ask, for me personally, Patrick Stewart started some kind of, quality TV when he first appeared on Star Trek: Next Generation. Which actor would you like to see on your show? Do you have some, I don't know, favorite one?
You mean like as in that role of Captain Picard, or?
No. In some kind of future sequel, do you have a preferred?
I don't have my treatment ready. That's a great question. Who would I choose to star in a Star Trek show right now? Well, probably Gal Gadot if she were available. I don't think she is, but she's incredible. I'd probably have Gal Gadot as my Wonder Woman, as my captain, and I'd want to throw Chris Pine in there for good measure because he's lovely to watch, but I think it would be confusing because he's already played Captain Kirk. So you probably have to have I probably have to have Gal Gadot and oh gosh, who else? Maybe what's her name? Who plays Daenerys Targaryen. I think we just have a bridge full of ladies. So I just want to pick all my favorite women right now that are on screen and put them in the show. Ooh, and the wonderful woman who plays the lead in Westworld. I'm forgetting her name as well. She would definitely be like the science officer, I think.
Hey, thanks a lot. If you were an author or director, which ideas would you bring into the next serial?
That's a great question too. I think I would be a terrible Star Trek writer because I just want to write every episode about volcanoes. Partly because I'm so frustrated with the way that they're typically shown in films and in TV shows. Documentaries are an exception, but even Star Trek, no one seems to understand what volcanoes are. And it's actually not that, it's pretty simple. If you're interested, come to my talk tomorrow. I think that like the ideas, in all honesty, that I would try to bring were, I would probably love to be like one of the scientific writers that was helping like put cool stories of science in there that linked to real things that are happening today. But most importantly, I'd want to see, I'd want to write with the same show I'd want to watch, which would be about, optimism, being, positivity, having a good outlook on the world. I think that's probably need more of that on television today. So many shows are really, really dark. We've been in this time for a while now where television shows are kind of downward looking and everything, even the color grading is dark. And the themes are dark, and it seems like maybe things are starting to change a bit, and shows are getting a little bit lighter. But I think there's definitely a space for that now. It's like a bright show that was like the Star Trek The Next Generation of modern shows, which Discovery is kind of doing a little bit. But I would just go like all out. Probably no one would watch my show because it would just be like everybody's happy all the time and everything's wonderful. Isn't this great? But yeah, I think so. Those are the two things. If I were writing the show, first of all, it would be terrible. Second of all, it would be all about volcanoes and starring Gal Gadot, and it would be really, really happy. That would be my Star Trek show.
Hello, I've got a little bit off-topic question, but I would like to ask you what's the most fascinating or exciting on the science that you studied on the volcanoes for you? Something most important for you about it?
Thank you for the question. The most exciting things that I've studied, I think, it's hard to pick one. But I can definitely talk probably about my experiences in North Korea, which, and if any of you saw the news this morning, there's huge news between North and South Korea. Both the leaders, first time a North Korean leader's been on South Korean soil, happened this morning for something very exciting, possibly. And that was and it's still a project that's sort of ongoing as well, but that was a project that's been really important to me. Because I've learned so much, not just about the volcano that we studied, but about Korea, about another culture that I didn't know much about before going there. And what we were doing in North Korea was, it was a science mission to go study this volcano that's on the border with China. Has had huge eruptions in the past that have covered huge areas of land, sent rocks as far away as Japan, so something like 1,000 kilometers away. So it's had huge eruptions in the past, and it's still active. We wanted to understand it better. And the main goal was doing this science, but the second equal importance goal was science diplomacy. So it was this idea that we could use science as a diplomatic tool to reach a hand across the border and say, we're all friends here. We can do something important together. And I think we really achieved it, is what I think the most remarkable thing is, that it was crazy enough, it actually worked. And we went into North Korea, and our team consisted of about half of people from outside of Korea, and half of the people were North Korean scientists. We worked together, we went and collected rocks together, we wrote papers together, we've published 2 papers now on the work. And when we're just standing next to each other, scientists and scientists, we're there to do the science, and there's no flags. We didn't talk about politics. We didn't want to, because we didn't care. They were just people. And so I think just like learning, watching, I'm so proud of the group that I was a part of, and watching what everyone in the group did to make this connection happen. I think that's probably one of the most amazing things that I've ever done, is be a part of that. So.
ask, do we know about any other well-known people that are inspired by Star Trek, that are watching a series, except the scientists you showed in the presentation? We saw Barack Obama. What about Donald Trump? Probably not.
For some reason, I don't think he's seen the show. I think things might be a bit different if he'd grown up watching the show. Yeah, other people inspired by Star Trek. Oh gosh, of course you asked me, and so now I've forgotten the name of everyone on the planet. Yeah, I think a lot of people. I picked my favorites. But there's a number of actors that are inspired by Star Trek. There are writers, a lot of writers and directors that I've met in my lifetime that have been inspired by Star Trek. And, you know, random people that have come across, you know, at Star Trek conventions and things that have told me their stories. I don't know, I can't do much better than Barack Obama, I think.
Do we have any other questions? If not, I think Kayla will stay a little time at the foyer. So if you want to meet her and ask her some other questions, so stop by at foyer. And otherwise, you are also invited tomorrow for the lecture on volcanoes and on the scientific expedition in Democratic Republic of Congo, and about popularizing science through filmmaking. And you are also invited for the screening tomorrow of the film Into the Inferno. Thank you, Kayla.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your questions.